All right, everyone, settle in. Today, we're doing something really cool. We're going to step back in time. I mean, way back, to a city that feels like it was plucked right out of Europe and dropped into North America. I'm talking, of course, about Old Québec. This isn't just a city. It's a place where you can literally feel 4 centuries of history under your feet. So that brings us to the big question, the one we're really going to unpack today. Think about it. How on earth did a 17th century European-style fortress manage to survive completely intact right here in North America? I mean, everything else has changed, right? Well, the answer is just an amazing story about strategy, geography, a bit of conflict, and, believe it or not, some seriously smart planning for the future. And every great story has a beginning, a single point in time where it all kicks off. For this story, that year is 1608. You're going to want to remember that one. This is it. This is the moment a whole new chapter for North America began, right there on the shores of the St. Lawrence. So what was so special about 1608? Well, that's the year a French explorer named Samuel de Champlain sailed up the river, looked at this spot, and said, "This is it." He was there to build Quebec City, which was going to be the heart, the absolute nerve center of this massive new French territory they called, well, New France. And let me be clear, he wasn't just setting up a little trading post. No, he was founding a capital. Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at why it's basically a fortress on a cliff. Then we'll dive into this idea of it being 2 towns in one. After that, a huge power shift from French to British rule. Then we'll see how it became a certified world treasure. And finally, we'll wrap up by looking at how on earth you keep a place like this from crumbling while people are still living in it. All right, let's jump right into part 1, the fortress on the cliff. Look, if you want to get Quebec City, you have to get its geography. It's everything. The spot Champlain picked is called Cap Diamant. That's Cape Diamond. And his choice, it wasn't just good, it was pure strategic genius. So you might be asking, why a cliff? Why not somewhere flatter? Well, it all comes down to defense and control. First off, you're high up, overlooking the river. You can see anyone coming from miles away. It's a perfect natural defensive spot. Second, if you control that cliff, you control the St. Lawrence River. And back then, that river was the highway. It was the main artery for all trade, all exploration. You owned the cliff, you owned the highway. And finally, that solid rock, the absolute perfect foundation to build massive walls, these huge ramparts that would make the city practically untouchable. But this whole cliff situation did more than just create a fortress. It actually gave the city a kind of split personality. Which leads us perfectly into our next section, a tale of 2 towns. We're talking about the very distinct upper and lower parts of Old Quebec. Okay, so think of it like this. You've got the upper town, the Hauteville, sitting on top of the cliff. This was the upstairs, the brain of the city. It's where you had the government, the military, with its huge citadel, the big, fancy churches, and of course that famous hotel, the Chateau Frontenac. It was all about power and administration. But then you go down the cliff to the downstairs, the lower town, or Bossville. This was the heart, the commercial engine. It was packed with merchants, sailors, and craftsmen, all bustling around the harbor in a place called Place Royale, which, by the way, is the exact spot where Champlain built his very first fort. And you can see this split in the buildings themselves, grand, imposing, institutional buildings up top, and these charming, smaller, commercial stone houses down below. So, for a century and a half, this city is the proud capital of New France. Everything is French. But then, something happens. A single event that completely changes the city's destiny forever. And that brings us to our third part, this huge, pivotal shift in power. The year is 1759. Right outside the city walls, on a field called the Plains of Abraham, a massive battle takes place. The British against the French. And the British win. By 1760, the city is no longer the capital of New France. It's now the capital of a British colony. But here's the really interesting part, the thing that makes Quebec so unique. The British didn't just bulldoze everything and start over. They moved in, but they didn't erase the city's French soul. What you get instead is this incredible architectural and cultural mashup, a city where French and British colonial styles literally stand right next to each other. It's amazing. So you've got this incredible story of survival, this amazing cultural fusion. It's no wonder the rest of the world eventually took notice and decided, hey, this place is special. That's how it became a true World Heritage Jewel. And it became official in 1985. That's the year UNESCO put the historic district of Old Quebec on its World Heritage list. And listen, they didn't just pick one cool building or a single church. No, they designated the entire old city, the whole thing. And UNESCO's reason for this is really telling. They called it, and I'm quoting here, an outstanding example of a fortified colonial city, the most complete north of Mexico. Just let that sink in. We're talking about the only walled city left north of Mexico. It's basically a perfectly preserved time capsule of how Europeans tried to build cities in the New World. Okay, so it's one thing to slap a fancy label on a city and call it a treasure. It's a whole other thing to actually protect it, right? And that brings us to our last and maybe most fascinating section. How do you preserve a living museum? How do you keep a 400-year-old city looking authentic when people are, still living and working there? Well, it turns out it takes a village. Or in this case, 3 levels of government working together. You've got the federal government taking care of the big national historic sites, like the Citadel. Then you've got the province of Quebec, which has this really powerful Cultural Property Act. And finally, you have the city itself, the municipal government, which has the final say on any construction or renovation. You can't just decide to paint your door a crazy color. Everything has to respect the history. But, and this is so important, all this preservation, it's not about turning the city into a stuffy, frozen-in-time exhibit. It's all about balance. Because Old Quebec is absolutely a living city. The French language is everywhere, it's vibrant, you have cultural traditions that have been going on for centuries, whether it's navigating the snowy streets in winter or the incredible festivals that take over in the summer. It's modern life playing out on a 400-year-old stage. And all of this is why it's known, and deservedly so, as the cradle of French civilization in North America. Think about that. This was the starting point, the epicenter from which French language, culture, and people spread out across an entire continent. This all boils down to a really cool concept called living heritage. It's this idea that history isn't something behind a velvet rope in a museum. It's the cobblestones under your feet, it's the apartment someone lives in, the bakery they work at. It's about keeping the past alive, not as a dusty old relic, but as a living, breathing thing for generations to come. So, I want to leave you with this one final thought. Just try to imagine it. For the people who actually live in Old Quebec, what does it feel like to walk through a living museum every single day? To have your daily life intersect with 400 years of history? It's a connection between the past and the present that almost nowhere else on Earth can offer.